Okay, everybody, let's get focused. Phones face down on the table in front of you, eyes up on the screen, sketchbooks open. We left off yesterday with Legrand Jatte, and how this is working class and upper class having leisure time together, just hanging out at this park. But what this painting is really about is about color. And so the artist uses small dabs of pure color next to each other that causes our eyes to mix the paint or mix the colors inside our brain instead of the artist mixing the colors on the canvas. All right. So our next painting by Seurat is Bathers at Osnier or Osnier. This gives you a size of the picture. And basically, it's almost the same image. It's like a working man's, a working class view of the same thing. This is an island just down the road from, or just down the river from Le Grand Jatte. So Le Grand Jatte is this red area right here. And just down the river, there's Osnier. And if you look at the picture, if you look at the background, what's going on in the background? Yes, you see the boats in the background, behind the boats. Yeah, factories. All right. So this is upriver, and this is an area where factories are using the river. And so you would think that this water is not as clean as downriver with Le Grand Jatte. So it's not as pleasant. And this is where the working class comes to hang out. There you go. There's the industrial scene in the background. We got factories. And we do have a couple of details that shows the high class. So this boat right there, this boat right here, you see that if you look closely at the detail, this guy's got a top hat. That's a sign of high class. She has a parasol. That's a sign of high class. And we, while most of this is lower class, we have these guys without shirts. That's lower class. And then the high class is there on the boat. And again, he mostly painted this like with a brush. So he would have painted this hat red, just like a flat color red, and then did the dotted style of brushwork on top of it. Again, because it would take too long to paint the whole thing with dots. All right, so this finishes us with Seurat. Are there any questions about Seurat? All right, so much art history and never enough time to cover it all. So let's go run through the art museum. We're now in part 5 of 6 of chapter 28, and we're going to take a look at Paul Gauguin. We are still looking at the French Impressionists, and he had a job. He had a good job as a stockbroker. He made lots of money as a stockbroker. His family lived very well, and the new technology of the telegraph enabled and the telephone enabled stockbrokers to be able to make better decisions. So he did well in this job. So he painted in his spare time, and he lived and worked close to where the Impressionists would hang out. So in this area of Paris, businessmen couldn't help but run into artists, and artists couldn't help but run into businessmen. And he became friends with some of the artists. And his artist friends introduced him to more artists. By the way, these are a couple of his paintings before he started making post-impressionism artwork. Anyways, Art history's story on this is that Gauguin left his family to pursue the art scene and become an artist. He had a good job, a good family, a good wife, and he had lots of money, and he left it all to go and pursue being an artist full time and live in poverty like the other artists did. But the actual story is that his wife and her family kicked him out. Anyways, now he and his family live in squalor because he was no longer a stockbroker. He was an artist and he wasn't making much money then. So he leaves Paris and goes to this artist colony called Pont-Aven. And this place attracted artists because of its beauty. So he goes to this church right here. And one thing you notice in front of this church, the two ladies that are there and how they're dressed, they're wearing traditional Breton clothing. And we'll get to that in just a minute. But inside this church, there is this crucifix. And Gauguin would attend this church. And during the sermons, he would look around and he saw this yellow crucifix. And that inspired him to do this painting called Yellow Christ. And here he is pushing the boundaries of abstraction. He has these wild colors. And notice the distorted proportions of the figures. Notice the flat colors. And notice the flat space. And then notice these three Marys. There's Mary Magdalene, Mary, mother of James, and Mary of Clopas. And they're wearing these clothes. This is traditional Breton clothes. And this area is not founded by French people. Even though it's in France, they are founded by Celts. And this is their traditional clothes for the women. And you can see that reflected in this painting. And he liked this image so much. He liked this painting. When he did his self-portrait, he included the painting. And so it's a painting within a painting. Okay, I've got a story for you. This takes place in the book of Genesis. And so we're going to go to modern day Israel. So if we get close, we're going to go to Beersheba. And we have Rebecca and Isaac. And they are married and they have twins. So she gives birth to twins. And in these times, it is the oldest son that is the heir to the family. So when the father dies, everything that the father owns goes to the eldest son. So if you have twin boys, then I guess the eldest son is the one who's born a couple minutes ahead of the other one. So they're the exact same age. Anyways, Isaiah is going to be the one that will inherit his father's fortune. Long story short, they trick the father into giving his empire or his stuff to the younger son. So the father promises it to the younger son. The younger son pretended to be the older son. And so this caused a lot of friction in the family. So the older brother, Isaiah, is absolutely furious, causes a lot of friction. So it's best if the younger son, Jacob, leaves. Long story short, he leaves and he goes and he gets married multiple times. This is a time when men can have multiple wives. And with those multiple wives, he has lots of children and he has a big, giant family. And then he decides to come back home. And on his way home, a messenger for his older brother meets him and says, "Hey, your brother is waiting with an army of 400. And the younger brother thinks that his older brother is still mad at him. So he thinks that the army is coming to attack him. So he sends his family away and he's going to go meet the army by himself. So he's by himself now and he meets, all right, and while he's by himself, an angel appears to him. and the angel immediately begins to wrestle with him. Now, the younger brother, Jacob, he's a badass. So he can go toe to toe with the angel. So, oh, by the way, you guys like my Photoshop and my PowerPoint skills here by adding the wings onto the wrestlers? I'm quite proud of that. So Jacob and the angel are wrestling with each other, and sometimes the angel is winning, and then sometimes Jacob is winning. Hey, how you doing?
This was in Miss Rowell's box.
Okay. All right, thank you. So the angel and Jacob are fighting all throughout the night, and the angel begins to realize that he is not going to win, that Jacob can go all night fighting the angel. So the angel dislocates Jacob's hip, and that's what causes the wrestling to end. And then at that point, the angel blesses Jacob. Now, it could be that the angel is God. It could be that it was an angel. There's different, variations of the story. But that's our story. And so we're going to take a look at this one. This gives you a sense of how large the painting is that we're going to look at. It's the one with the red there. Are we good? All right, so if you take a look at this painting, you notice that these ladies are in this traditional Breton clothing. And these women have just exited this church, and they've heard the sermon telling the story of Jacob and the angel. And so when they come out, it's not that they're seeing the Jacob and the angel, but it's on their minds. And so that's what this painting is that the women are thinking about Jacob and the angel. And so they're praying outside the church. They've just heard the sermon about Jacob wrestling the angel. And this was a popular story in the sermons. Most of these ladies have their eyes closed. And there's a couple that I want to point out to you. Oh, by the way, the tree trunk here separates the real world from the imaginary world. On this side of the tree trunk is the real world with the ladies. They've just come out of church. And on the other side of the tree trunk is the story of Jacob wrestling the angel. And then I want to point out on the far left is this figure of the woman. We see her profile and she is praying. On the far right, we see this figure of a man. The man is Gauguin. He painted himself in the picture. And then the woman, that is Madeline. And that is a sister of one of the artists at the colony. And he had a huge crush on her. But he never did anything about it. He never approached her. He never bothered her. But he had a big crush on her. But she was very Christian. She went to church regularly and dressed up the same as the Breton women. And she was 17 and he was 40. And like I said, he never acted on his desire. But one interpretation of this painting is that it is a painting of temptation. That he is tempted to do something about his crush on her, but he doesn't give in to that temptation. And then the apple tree is that tree right there. It could serve as, or it could be a reference or a symbol of the apple tree or the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden, where the snake tempted Eve. Just like Gauguin is tempted by Madeline. So it is after Gauguin paints this painting that he goes to live with Van Gogh in south of France. Now, when we talk about Van Gogh, I'll tell all about that story. But so this is right before he goes to visit Van Gogh. Now, there's a lot of influence by Japanese art. I made a big deal that a lot of art at this time is influenced by Japanese prints, and here's an example of that. The image of wrestlers was popular print at the time, and so he incorporated that. This odd color, this red dirt or this red base, is very odd, just like the red sky in some of these Japanese prints. So you can see the influence by Japanese art. Now, after a series of dissatisfying affairs in Paris and other parts of France, he is dissatisfied with his life and he wants to live with more primitive people. So he wants to find a more pure people. So he went to Tahiti at 42 years old. His first day was from 1891 to 1893. He stayed there 2 years. It is a 9-week journey to get from France to Tahiti. All right. So by the way, yeah. So, and it's also called French Polynesia. So I bet you're wondering, what is it like in French Polynesia? So this is French Polynesia. It is an island paradise. And it's a French colonial island paradise. And there's only 3 things in French Polynesia. There's islands, mountains, and beaches. And it was said you don't need to work for food. You could just pluck it off the trees that were all around. And this is the European fantasy. The European fantasy is of scantily clad women and skin that was sun-kissed and a primitive, simplistic lifestyle. And this is a European romantic vision, like romantic in a sense of like foreign adventures. And so there is a disconnect between fantasy and reality. So Gauguin had these expectations of these scantily clad, beautiful women. And the reality is that these women were these large, shapeless dresses. And this is because the Catholics had been there already, and the Catholics had scared everybody that they were all going to hell if they don't refrain from their like sexual desires. So they dress in these I'm just going to say hideous dresses. And then his expectation was to have these, beautiful beaches and mountains and palm trees. And he lived in the capital. And the capital was created by European settlers. So the capital city looked just like a European city. And so he didn't like that. So what he does is he moves out into the rural areas and he lives out there. And he paints stuff like this. So he paints these landscapes. I do want to point out these like really bold colors and these flat shapes. That is very typical of Gauguin. So lots of landscapes and then lots of paintings of the girls. Some he paints fully clothed, and in some he paints partially clothed, and in some he paints totally nude. But remember that this is not the reality. Girls are not walking around half dressed like the European fantasy. They are walking around in these large dresses, these large shapeless dresses. And part of the European fantasy is that that these people are closer to nature, almost like Adam and Eve before they were kicked out of Eden. They walked around naked because there was no shame. There was no idea of being unclothed was shameful. And so that's kind of the European fantasy of French Polynesia at this time. That it's not a sexual nudity, it's an innocent nudity. But there's kind of this oddness about it. This 40-year-old guy, 42-year-old guy painting young women without clothes. All right. So during his first stay, he's looking for a woman. None are around his area, and he goes to a village on the other side of the island, and he was invited to the hut of a local woman. And in the conversation, he mentioned that he was looking for a wife. The woman said, "Oh, I know just the person, my daughter." And so the daughter was 13 years old. And Paul Gauguin, after meeting her, he says, "Are you afraid of me?" She says, "No." And Paul Gauguin says, "Would you live in my hut for good?" And she said, "Yes." And Paul Gauguin asks her, "Have you ever been ill?" And she says, "No." And that was their courtship. They were married that afternoon. And she went home with him. This seems odd to us, but it was common for Tahitian women to get married as soon as they could bear children. They had a lower life expectancy, means that you would grow up sooner. It was common for French colonists to take on Tahitian women as wives. Later, Paul Gauguin would tell that as they lay in bed together, she would tell him stories about all the myths of her culture. By the way, her name is Teha Amana, and they were together for 2 years, and they had a son together. All right, so a story. This is a story told by Paul Gauguin that he went. He walked into a neighboring village, and he didn't come back until early in the morning. I'm sorry about this coughing. So he comes back early in the morning, and when he walks in, he finds his wife, Teha Amana, naked on the bed, staring at him in terror. He said she never looked so frightful as in that moment. And Paul Gauguin says the reason for her fear is that she believes in the Tupapas, the spirits of the dead who in Tahitian mythology inhabit the interior of the island and whose presence illuminates the forest at night. She was scared because Paul Gauguin was walking around at night and disturbed the Tupapas. This was a bad omen. Something bad would happen because Paul Gauguin is walking around at night. And Paul Gauguin is skeptical of the spirits, and he attributes the glowing in the forest to a phosphorescent fungus that grows in the trees. So this is our painting right here, Teha Amana. She's lying on a bed, and here she is looking scared at Paul Gauguin as he walks in the early morning. So it depicts the adolescent girl laying face down on the bed, looking at the viewer with a fearful expression on her face. And then we have this weird figure in the background. It could be a woman, it could be a spirit that watches over the girl, or it could be a statue. If it is a woman, then what is the relationship with the girl? If it's a statue, then who is it? The disproportionate scale suggests a Tahitian statue or a tiki. It is also disproportionate. The hands are larger than the feet on her. So it has weird proportions. And if the figure in the background is a spirit, which spirit is it? Is it the spirit of the ancestors? Is it a spirit of the dead? Or is it it is very unsettling and weird to have this figure back there. And then these are the phosphorescent glows that would glow in the forest at night. And we begin to wonder, is everything in this room a result of the girl's imagination? Some suggest that the viewer is the spirit of the dead. So the spirit could be either watching, it could mean that we are watching the spirit or the spirit is watching us. Paul Gauguin says that the use of purples on the wall was to create a background of terror. He also says the sheets must be yellow to arouse the emotions in the viewer. And we can compare this to Manet's Olympia. He was a big fan of this painting. He admired the flat colors, the absence of shading, and the rejection of traditional and academic proportion for depicting people. And like Manet's Olympia, the body is awkwardly positioned and disproportionate. The feet overhang the bed. And it's also shocking, like Manet's Olympia. What's shocking is the age of the model, his wife there. And some historians think that Gauguin made this story up. Um, the reason for making this story up is that art historians that have looked into this said that she was a Christian, and it is impossible for a Christian to have these other local beliefs. But I disagree with that because I think people can be Christian and also having other beliefs, especially with their cultures. The art historian says that Paul Gauguin is projecting his own European culture on her. Basically saying that because she is primitive, she holds these beliefs. This could be true, but I think differently. Just because she went to church doesn't mean that she doesn't believe in other things. This is a 13 or 14-year-old girl raised in a small village in Tahiti. The other villagers would have stories about the spirits, and she could internalize those stories as well as Christian teachings. Just because she is exposed to Christianity doesn't mean doesn't mean she doesn't believe in other things. I have known Christians who have believed in other things and superstitions as well as Christianity. So just because she's part of one doesn't mean she isn't capable of another. Another art historian says that it is Gauguin that she is afraid of. That they put on this like sexual predator spin on this painting. So they portray him as a middle-aged white male colonialist and a sexual predator for underage girls. It says that the girl had no power to resist him. It says that Paul Gauguin is taking sadistic pleasure in depicting the fear that he himself caused. So one example is that Paul Gauguin sees her in a fearful state and says that she never looked so beautiful, and that he was drawn to comfort her, promising never to leave her again. All right. So after 2 years, he goes back to France, leaving Tehamana and her son behind, and he goes back to Europe. So, and then a couple years later, he returns back to Tahiti, and he tries to get back together with Tehamana, and she wants nothing to do with him. One of the reasons why she wants nothing to do with him is that he has pretty advanced syphilis. So he has these open sores all over his body, and that's really repulsive. Other than, yeah, and also just he's older than she is, much older than she is, and also he left her, so she has no reason to want to be with him. And so our last painting for Gauguin is this one right here. Where do we come from? What are we? And where are we going? It's a rather large painting. And Gauguin believes it's his finest work. And this painting reads from right to left. Let me go back to here. All right, so the painting is of so we in the background we see the sea and Tahiti's mountains in the background. All the figures have symbolic meanings. And the figures might have the answers to the title of the picture. And the questions that are asked in the title are fundamental ones and address the very root of human existence. So this is a bit of an esoteric mystery. The actual meaning of this painting is only known to Gauguin himself. That means he didn't really discuss the meanings or the questions. But he does have a very expressive color scheme here. And it's primarily like blue, green, and orange. And with blue and orange being opposite colors, we have practically a complementary color scheme here. All right, like I said, this painting reads from right to left. So in the lower right-hand corner, we have this baby, and this is where we have been born, or this is where we have been. So we were all born, we were all babies at one time. And there are women with the infant, and one of them is the infant's mother. The standing figure in the middle is where we are now. It is the mother picking fruit and feeding to her child. Also, she is reaching for an apple, which is a reference to Adam and Eve. It's a reference to Eve. After eating the apple, she discovers her nakedness. There's an old lady in the lower left. This is where we are going. It is the mom in old age with her daughter and the infant from the lower right, all grown up into a woman herself. And she is raising a daughter. Raising a daughter is the embodiment of her life's purpose and her work. And then the statue right here is of a pagan religion, but the gold on the outsides is a reference to icons. And Gauguin had discussed making his figures deliberately out of proportion. And they kind of look like they're in, like, if we go back to a painting, it kind of looks like odd Photoshop or bad Photoshop or a collage where like things don't really look like they occupy the same space. Okay, so that finishes us for Gauguin. Are there any questions about Gauguin that we have discussed? All right. So let's go to our final discussion of chapter 28. All right, so much art history and never enough time to cover it all. So let's go run through the art museum. We are still in chapter 28. This is our final presentation of chapter 28, in which we discuss Vincent van Gogh. I have heard his name pronounced Vincent van Gogh. I've heard it 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 pronounced Vincent van Gogh. And I've heard it pronounced Vincent van Gogh or Gosh. But we in America tend to go with Vincent van Gogh. All right, so just like Caravaggio, Vincent van Gogh is just as much fun to talk about his life as his artwork. So one of the interesting things is that his uncle owned an art gallery, and he employed Vincent van Gogh to work in that art gallery. And part of that art gallery was he had different locations in different places. So he sent him all over Europe to look at museums and learn about art. By the way, uh, Vincent van Gogh is from the Netherlands, but he spent most of his time in France. So he grew up in the Netherlands, and then he moved to France, mostly Paris, and we'll talk about some other things. But he was sent to a location in London, and this is for his job for the art gallery. And as part of working at the gallery, so he was sent to London, and he worked at one of the branches of the art gallery, and he stayed with a family while he was there. There was a widowed mother and a 19-year-old daughter, and Vincent van Gogh was 20 at the time. And he fell in love, but it's unclear whether he fell in love with the daughter or the mother. Anyways, he professed his love and asked her to marry him, and she did not feel that way for him. And she was already engaged to another man. So he argued, like, what is wrong with me? Like, he wouldn't take no for an answer. And this led to intense arguments, and he was immediately kicked out of the house. So his brother had to fire him because that looks bad on the company to have his employees go, and it's, the other family was nice enough to take him in, but when he gets there, he causes trouble. So he got fired for a scandal in London. Then he became a preacher like his father. And at the time, it was his favorite thing to preach the world. He was sent to a small coal village in Belgium. And people in that village were extremely poor. And Vincent van Gogh was very sympathetic to the poor. He wanted to help. And most ministers didn't want to go to the poorest and the dirtiest places in the country. So the church put him in a comfortable house. After a while, he stopped living in that house where, and there was a local woman who was very sick, and she was not able to work, and she could not afford to pay for rent. So Vincent van Gogh gave her his house, and he went to live in one of the coal mining shacks instead. And these people are so poor they don't have any furniture. They just sleep on the floor with a blanket. So they covered in coal dust. So the locals called him the Christ of the coal mines. And the local community loved him. But the church hated him. They did not want somebody living in squalor representing their church. So he got fired from the church. So then his brother owns an art gallery, and he saw potential in Vincent. So he gives Vincent van Gogh a monthly stipend. So he pays him by the month. And Vincent van Gogh sends him paintings. So that's his job, is to paint. And Van Gogh sends his brother paintings, and his brother is to sell them. And then they split the profits. About this time, he professed his love for his cousin and proposed marriage. He promised to make her happy. She had just lost her husband. And she said no and ran away to her parents' house. Vincent van Gogh showed up at his aunt's and uncle's house trying to talk to his cousin. And he held his hand over a gas flame and said, I only need as much time as I can't stand the pain from this lamp anymore. And the uncle blew out the gas flame and told him to go away. After this, he met a prostitute. She was an alcoholic. She had syphilis. She had a 4-year-old daughter, and she was pregnant with another man's child. He felt sorry for her, and then he fell in love with her. He told his brother he was trying to help her and her children. So his brother increased the payments to financially support her. And Van Gogh and the prostitute lived together, and he caught syphilis and gonorrhea from her. And he was hospitalized from the pain. But when Vincent van Gogh was in the hospital, she went back to prostituting. So when Theo heard of the scandal, he knew that Vincent van Gogh had a big heart, and this woman was taking advantage of him. So he threatened Van Gogh. He says, either leave her or I stop paying you. So that's when Van Gogh moves to Paris. He moves to Paris to become an artist. and he wanted to create a colony of artists living together. And he's trying to talk other artists into starting a colony together, but nobody else is interested. And this is kind of his work before, well, at the early part of his career, his work is very dark, lots of browns, all right, lots of brownish gray paintings. So his early career has dark colors, his late career has bright colors. And so we're going to watch him as he moves to Arles. He's in search of brighter colors, and he's still dreaming of an artist colony, and he invites Gauguin to live with him. So we're going to take a look at this painting right here. This is called the Yellow House, and it's this yellow house that he moves into. He rents this small, cozy house soon after his arrival. It's a 2 minutes walk from the railway station, and for the only time in his adult life, he had a real home of his own. I want you guys to know the Night Cafe. This photo gives you a sense of how large the Night Cafe is. This cafe is a famous dive that was open 24 hours a day. Vagrants, homeless, and those who could not afford a hotel would stay here. And this is not a comfortable place. This is a place you would walk into and immediately walk out of. Vincent van Gogh would frequently visit here and drink himself into oblivion. And when he painted this, he spent 3 nights in the cafe painting this. And he gave the painting to the cafe owner in exchange for art supplies, room and board, and alcohol. Now, this painting right here has these very garish colors. Like the yellows are very like a dull yellow, and the red is a dull red, and the green is a dull green. And these are not the realistic colors of this place. This place actually had gray walls. The clock up on the wall reads after midnight. And then we have some characters going on here. We have like a lady sitting in the lap of another guy, or maybe they're in chairs and they're just really close to each other. And then we have other people. Like one guy has his head in his hand and his arms, like sleeping at the table, and a couple people are drinking and having conversation in another part. I want you to know the term impasto. Have I given you that term before? Impasto. Impasto is thick, heavy brushstrokes, like thick, heavy paint on canvas. All right, and we are going to stop there for today. We're going to start with the story tomorrow.